we've had some very difficult conversations around trying to sort out how to be real, not just like, oh, it's all good, this is super cool, like, no, like, I feel like there were some things that were really difficult for me to process, and now that we're reconnecting, I want to be able to talk about them.
Who am I?
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 This is Who Am I, Really? A podcast about adoptees that have located and connected with their biological family members. I'm Damon Davis, and on today's show is Isaac, who called me from Hawaii. In Isaac's story, you'll hear about him as a boy who was loved but struggled to connect with his adoptive parents in certain ways. Having left the island, a chance musical gig put him back on Hawaiian soil and in position to launch his search. In reunion, he reconnected with both of his parents at the same time, elected to move back to Hawaii to reconnect with the land and his people, and even found that learning more about the island made him closer to his adoptive family too. This is Isaac's journey.
My mother's sweet embrace. 9 months of the demons kept at bay. Loved and safe, just an innocent in the womb. A miracle of life, that is you.
Isaac was adopted on the big island of Hawaii as an infant. He said he was lucky to be adopted into a family who was from Hawaii, even though they're actually culturally different. Isaac's adoptive mother is Japanese, his adoptive father is half Filipino, half German, and Isaac is Filipino-Hawaiian, but they all come from Hawaii. He said that blend of family members means he resembles his adoptive family.
I sort of knew for a long time. I remember I was just sitting in the kitchen. I was really young, maybe even like early elementary school or maybe early middle school, and just talking with my dad, and I was like, hey Dad, am I adopted? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, okay, cool. I just like wanted to make sure.
Thanks.
Glad we're clear. Yeah, I got it. It was that I don't think it ever really felt like a big thing until there started to be different things that would come up for me later on, like around middle school and high school. I started having a lot more trouble at school and acting out in different ways, and and I think that's when I started to feel like there was some sort of like something was kind of missing.
Interesting.
There's some part of myself was being unanswered or unfulfilled, and my parents were really struggling to connect with me, and we were having really difficult communication problems. But that was kind of like later, like I said, like my younger life is just as far as how it felt as an adoptee, it felt really normal and not really like anything that was all that special or different.
Isaac's family lived on Oahu near Honolulu until he was 6. Then the family moved to Washington State in 1993. He said he struggled in school while his brother and sister, who were older and biological to his parents, were doing well in their studies. He said he felt like he wasn't accomplishing what he was supposed to, so he would retaliate because he wasn't living up to the standards.
I got really into music, and, I found a lot of solace in that. I would have, friends to go play music with, and a lot of groups and bands and orchestras that I would go and play in, so that kind of kept me from going too far off the rails, you know what I mean? Like, I didn't get super lost, but I definitely ended up in some groups of friends that I kind of just, didn't really know why I was, drinking when I was really young, started smoking weed when I was, really young, and just sort of self-destructive in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
But, yeah, I think that's kind of how it manifested. And it's strange, I was talking with someone who worked on my reunification process, and she was kind of looking at all those behaviors and how I was describing them, and she's like, that could be potentially very linked to this whole adoption process, which I'm still kind of learning more about, and the residual effects of that sort of biological separation and those kinds of things, you know?
Yeah, it's fascinating when you think back to the linkage of an individual to their biological family and then try to make the leap to how they perform or underperform or act out or, you know, feel like they don't fit in can be really fascinating, especially because it seems to come as a residual effect so far down the line. It doesn't feel like it's immediately adjacent, right? Like, if you punch me, I get hurt right now. But if you separate me from my biological parents, it might not impact me for a year or 20 years, you know?
That is so interesting, man. That's exactly, so I'm skipping ahead like a little bit, but the reunification process has made me look at my past in such a different way. Like, I re-question all of those negative thoughts that I had about myself because now I might actually have a root cause of where some of those things came from.
Yeah.
And what was possibly going on with me psychologically. And, trying to figure out, like, why do I feel different than my siblings as far as, like, what I can and can't do? Or why do I have desires to act a certain way? Or my body feels like it wants to do certain things that they're not into doing. It's like, why am I having such a hard time communicating and connecting? And I was like learning about, that natural ability to connect and communicate with your birth parents is because you're so biologically linked, and like especially with birth mother, right?
Yeah.
It's like that's the voice you hear, that's the food you eat, that's all the things you consume as a baby in the womb, and then as soon as you're out, it's just completely severed. I think that's like a far more traumatic experience than I ever really have thought about.
Yeah.
For both people.
Yeah.
For both parties.
Yeah, so, you're right. As you say it, for both parties, I think of two books that I think you've probably heard of that are incredibly enlightening. One of which is The Primal Wound, which talks about the very thing you're speaking of. The separation of mother and child at birth is incredibly detrimental, in some of the facets that you've talked about. That connection that you've had, that voice that you've heard from inside and all that other stuff. And then the other book that I think of that was incredibly powerful for me in terms of empathizing with any mother, honestly, not just birth mothers, but just any mother, is The Girls Who Went Away. And the fact that, it talks about these women who were oftentimes in situations that felt so out of control. They had no power. They were sent off to far off places by themselves to give birth to a child and asked to never speak of it again in many instances. Like, you've an act created this child. You've carried this child for 9 months of an entire year, and then you've gone through the physical process of bringing this child into the world, and then suddenly they're gone, and that's it.
Yep.
I mean, I don't. Yeah. It's really almost unfathomable that it could go as it does in adoption, but that's often the case. I was curious about Isaac's relationship with his older siblings, biological children of his adoptive parents. He said it was a little challenging because he mostly got along with his much older sister, with whom he shared an interest in music, but he was frequently contested by his older brother.
It's always funny talking about these things because it's reflecting on how I felt then and trying to acknowledge that it's very different how I feel now, like, especially with like my brother and sister, I connected really well with my sister. She was a musician. She inspired me in a lot of ways. She played a lot of music, and I pretty much like followed her around. Like, whatever music she liked, I liked. She got into snowboarding, I got into skiing, and she was playing in music and with musicians all the time. So I kind of just like shadowed her a lot. But then she was older than me by quite a bit. She's about 8 years older than me. So when she left, and my brother and I are still living at the house, I mean, I just had a hard time communicating with him. Like, looking back on it, I just remember like we would fight, and like I would do stupid things. Like, I'd forget my keys because I would be more forgetful than other people in the family, or less clean and responsible with things. So I'd like forget my keys, come home, and it would be like, I'm locked out and he's inside, and it's like, well, you're just gonna stay out there, you know? And,
Wow.
and it's like, it feels like, oh man, that's mean, but at the same time, I also, you know, like, I'm sure I wasn't always super nice to him either. You know, like, I was rude to him, and I think judgmental of a lot of his behaviors and stuff, because we just didn't share a lot of interests. And then there was this thing of like my dad and my brother, you know, like they did Boy Scouts and Cub Scouts together. My mom was working and my sister was kind of older. So it was also this thing of like, I was a skateboarding like musician who didn't really like to do his homework and didn't clean up too well after himself.
Right.
It's just like the odd one out, you know,
Mhm.
like I didn't have a lot of there wasn't a lot of things that I could share with my family at the time. And I'm not sure if that was just because I was being resistant to it or I just felt alienated like a lot of teenagers do. But, you know, my sister and my brother, I think now it's really interesting because like after I met my birth parents and moved to Hawaii, it changed so much of our relationship. Like my brother calls me on the phone to check in and see how I'm doing. And I just taught his daughter, my niece, an ukulele lesson online today. And like, he says that he loves me, you know, and like, it blows my mind because that's not how I felt our relationship was when I was growing up. You know,
Yeah.
it felt really hard. It felt really distant. It felt very, like angry. And we weren't like physical people. We weren't fighting like physically. We just like distance ourselves from each other or like not talk, just not acknowledge each other's existence.
Yeah.
And I think part of it also is that with the adoption thing is that I didn't really know much about myself. Like I wasn't from Hawaii the same way that my brother and sister were, 'cause they were into their teens, whereas I was only 6 when we left. So it's just the cultural differences growing up in Hawaii also made it hard for us, I think. You know, I just like grew up in Washington and it's a very different society over there. So some of that ability to communicate with each other, I think was really tested at times.
Yeah. Yeah, I could imagine. Yeah, some of it sounds like classic brotherly battles, and then some of it does definitely sound like very incongruent interests and, you know, different perspectives, partially because like
Yeah.
he and your father were into the same stuff and you were just not, and that's natural, you know.
That's so real, man. And it's really funny now because I have learned so much more about Hawaii and like what it means to be from here and what it means to grow up here and be culturally from here, having lived here now just for like the last couple of years, that now I can connect with it. Like now I find stuff where I'm like, oh, I like this Hawaiian music. And he's like, I like that Hawaiian music too. And I was like, dude, I never was into it growing up. You know,
Mm-hmm.
he was always listening to Hawaiian music and I wasn't into it, but now I get it. So we actually like, you know, send photos of when we go to concerts and stuff. And it's really interesting how Hawaii specifically has been tying my family back together. You know, like all these like shredded relationships that I think I had growing up, we're starting to like mend those wounds through understanding this place.
Isaac was a sensitive kid, touchy-feely, enjoying tactile interactions with the world around him. He loved meeting new people, and he was an emotional dude, sometimes shedding tears. His parents, on the other hand, are different. Isaac said they're loving in their actions, but not necessarily as much in the way they express themselves.
I still struggle to like sometimes get hugs when I really want them.
Yeah.
But now, you know what I mean? So I think we just had these communication issues where like I was feeling something, you know, I was having a feeling and I didn't know how to explain it. I didn't know how to say like, this is why I'm upset, because it wasn't like a logical thing. It's just an emotion that's overwhelming me. So then they wouldn't know how to talk to me because they need to know. Like, that's the amazing thing about my parents. It's like, what's the problem? Let's fix it. You know,
Mm-hmm.
they're very like, what do you need to fix the problem? Because that's what we want to do. We want to help you to fix the problem. But I was so emotional and kind of confused. I was like, I don't know what the problem is. I don't feel good. Blah, blah. You know, and so we just struggled with that constantly. like just never able to really find a way for me to express what I was feeling, and that I didn't need something to be done. I needed something to be felt and understood. And I think that caused us to, eventually I just sort of felt like I was kind of raising myself, like taking care of myself. I would, go out after school and like skateboard until late into the night and just kind of watch out for myself. But then they were always there to catch me when things would go really bad. Like if I got really hurt, they would take me to the hospital. If I needed to go to rehearsal for music, they would take me to rehearsal. If I needed an instrument, they would provide that for me. Like they always provided a lot of like really practical tools and a safe environment with like food on the table and my own room. It was like, I think that was the thing, is like they provided for me all of the things and all of the structure, but I struggled with like not being able to communicate and understand my emotional self and find ways of really like embracing that with them.
In 2014, Isaac remembers asking his parents if they had any adoption paperwork. They had a file with some rudimentary information, but it was the first time he had seen anything about his birth parents. The file told Isaac their ages when he was conceived, had his birth certificate inside, and detailed some of their interests. Isaac's birth mother was an artist and a musician. His birth father was a radio DJ.
And it just blew my mind, like how much I reacted to it. I didn't expect that I was going to actually like react to it in the way that I did, but it's just like all of a sudden, all these emotions and like these feelings and these overwhelming thoughts about like, oh my gosh, she was only 22 when she had me, and this was a thing, and he's Hawaiian and Caucasian and she's Filipino, and like every little bit of information speaks like so much volumes that I wasn't expecting. Like just those little tidbits like really, really ignited a lot of questions. So then in 2015, I was playing full time as a bass player up in Seattle, and I got into a band, and they just so happened to be from Maui, and I was like, oh, that's cool. I didn't think too much about it. And then they're like, hey, we're going to be playing a New Year's gig on Maui. Do you want to come and play? And I was like, sure. So I went over. I'd maybe only been back to Hawaii a handful of times. But this time I took that folder of paperwork with me.
While Isaac was on Maui, he looked up adoption agencies in the area. His search brought back the organization Hawaii International Child. Isaac gave them a call, where he learned one of their services is adoption reunifications. They asked him to take pictures of the paperwork he was carrying and send it over. Just weeks after being in Maui for the New Year's Eve gig, Isaac received an important phone call.
I was about to go on stage at a gig, and I get this call from Christine Altwies, who's the head over there. And she's like, hey, so we found your dad.
Wow.
And do you want to talk to him on the phone? And I was like right now? And she's like, well, yeah. And I was like, oh, well, I gotta go play a gig. Like, I'm about to go on stage. I can't really talk, but I want to, can I like call him back or can I call him, So we set up a time to talk on the phone, and that was awesome. It was our first time talking on the phone, and it was just wild, man, to hear his voice. But yeah, so from the time I thought about it in like 2014, I mean, I suppose I maybe have had questions before then, but I don't remember taking any active steps to really learn anything until 2014. So then 2014, get the paperwork, 2015, make the call and send out the info. In 2016, just like a few weeks later, they find Tommy, my birth father. And then in April, on my 29th birthday of April 2016, I met Tommy for the first time.
Wow. That's really crazy. Take me back to, so you you've got, first of all, it's awesome that this coincidence of joining this band that is Hawaiian and happens to go back there to the island.
Yeah.
I mean,
I know, man.
if you hadn't joined them, like, you might have stretched out this search for years.
Totally.
You have no idea.
Absolutely.
So it's so cool that they were going back there. But,
Yep.
tell me a little bit about, one, how did this gig go with in the back of your mind? Like, you just got the news that your birth father could have been on the phone with you before you even went on stage. That is crazy.
That's hilarious. That's funny, man. Yeah, I went out and I remember it was like a house show, I think. And I remember just being like, "Hey guys, so I think my birth father just called me." and everybody's like, "Oh wow!" Like,
Yeah.
I think it took a second because they're like, "What do you mean your birth father? Like your dad? Is that what you call him? That's a weird thing to call your dad." And I'm like,
right.
no, like, cause I'm like adopted and like there's this other human being out there and they're like, oh my God, wait, you didn't take the call? I was like, no, I don't know. It's like, what are you supposed to do, man? And it was also really funny because when I talked to Tommy about it, Tommy's been a radio DJ for a really long time in Hawaii and, he's emceed, he hosts shows, he's worked with a lot of musicians. So when Christine called him back and was like, "Oh, sorry, he's got a gig," he was actually like, "Oh, that's awesome,"
Yeah.
Like, "Oh, that's great." Like, I can't believe he's a musician, he actually gigs and does music. Like, that's great.
Yeah.
So it was a weird like misconnection that actually ended up bringing us way closer together.
That's really awesome. I can imagine how he must have geeked out on that. I'm just imagining the parallels. Like, if your dad, your birth father's like this awesome mechanic and you call right before the Indy 500 and, like, I can't take the call. The race is starting.
No, I'm
you know
about
what I mean?
to go hit the road, man. Yeah.
That's really
For real.
amazing.
For
That's
real.
super cool. In between the gig and the eventual phone call where Isaac and Tommy finally spoke for the first time, Isaac can't remember how he felt. Things happened so fast, there was no time to think. What was probably a week between the gig and the first call felt like a day. When that first call happened, Isaac was with Christine of Hawaii International Child.
She actually taped our first phone call.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah. So I have a recording of it. You know what I mean? And it's like, we filmed the first time that I ever met my birth father. We filmed the first time I meet my birth mom. Like, I'm really grateful because it was happening so fast that I think I have to go back and like listen to those things or remind myself, like, this actually happened,
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah, that's crazy. What an awesome thing to have a recording of that first conversation. That's just, wow. That's a rarity.
Yeah.
A lot of people record the first meeting, but the first conversation isn't something that people typically have the technology or forethought to do. So that's super cool. Wow. Amazing.
It is, man. And I think about it all the time because, like, if I wanted to, like try and remind myself, like, what it was really like, I don't have to think. I can just go grab the thing. And, like, I listened to it, I've only maybe listened to it once or twice since then, but just knowing it's there, and I'm sure there'll come another time where it'll be, like, I'll put some music to it or something.
Yeah, that would be cool. That would be real cool.
Yeah.
So what do you remember about that first conversation with him? How did it go?
I think the thing that was really fascinating was that it was really casual. Like, it was like as if we'd talked before,
Yeah.
and some small talk. There was like some things about just like, "Oh, so how was your gig?" Like, "Oh, it was good."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What about you? He's like, "Oh, I got, I'm hosting a MC thing." I was like, "Oh, cool."
Wow.
I think something that came up for us was trying to figure out how to talk about some of the more emotional and difficult things, because at the time I just was so excited,
Yeah.
I was so excited and he was so excited, and I'm even realizing like how rare that is too, to find like a birth father who's willing and excited to reconnect. That I just, I was like, this is great. It's just how it's supposed to be. And, I do remember, learning little things about, was he given the option to keep me and things like that? And was it the best thing? And the circumstances around him and my birth mom's relationship and the complications around that. But I don't think it ever got to a very heavy place, which I kind of enjoyed for that first bit. It's kind of like getting to know somebody new. You actually just ease into it a little bit and just enjoy the fact that you've got a chance to talk.
Tommy and Isaac spoke for the first time in January. Their first meeting was a few months later in April. Isaac set up a GoFundMe to help raise the money necessary to buy the airfare to go from Washington State home to Hawaii. His community rallied around him, helping him to fly home. Luckily, he didn't have any musical gigs scheduled, so it was easy to make the trip. Some of Isaac's friends, who lived in Honolulu, picked him up from the airport and offered to drive him to the meeting. Hawaii International Child arranged for an office location for the pair to reconnect, and the timing of everything seemed to be working out perfectly.
And then they were like, what if we do it on your birthday, on April 27th? And I was like, that would be great. How freaking cool is that? You know what I mean? Like, it's like a reverse birthday, like instead of just being born again, you get parents,
That's awesome. I love that. That's funny.
Yeah.
You get parents. That's really cute.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
That was great.
Well, that's cool, man. Did you, I saw in the video that you got to play your ukulele for him?
Yeah. That was gnarly. I think, it was all the excitement and all like the fun. And then like when we actually met, it was really cool, but there was a very like poignant moment where it really registered to me who this person was. Like he's really fun and he's like a very public person and he's super extroverted. So we just like, we're laughing and having a good time. And then I had to take a breath and be like, okay, actually right before I went to Hawaii for the reunification stuff, these songs started coming up. I was like I'd just be sitting around in my van and I cranked out like a couple of songs about family and about, what that feels like. And I was like, man, I wrote this song about family. I think I should play it for him when we first meet, and it's like something about this feels like home. Something about you, I already know. Something about this tells me that we're family. That's like the first verse. And it was like, it's going to convey more of how I feel than I'm going to be able to, because otherwise I'm just going to like be cool. I'm going to try and just talk shop and enjoy it. Whereas like, I really want to try and communicate how this feels. So yeah. And dude, there's some footage that I've got and I'm playing the song for him and the first verse comes around at the end. So I sing through the whole song and he's sitting there. I'm trying like not to look at him because I know I'm going to crack, like,
Yeah.
I know I'm just going to break. And, but then I get to the very last lines and it's a repetition of the first lines and he sings along with me. He sings like the last couple of lines like in harmony with me. And it just like, I was wrecked, man. It just like blew my mind.
Oh, God, I would have absolutely burst into tears. Jeez.
Yeah. Yeah. I couldn't, and I watch it now and it still gets me where it's like I'd never played that song for anyone before. Or maybe I'd play it for close friends, but like it's not like he'd heard it before. And yet at the very end, he picks up on it. He knows me that he sings the line just like right in the perfect spot with me, and that was it, man. Like that cinches it,
Yeah,
right?
that's incredible. Because it's a signal too to your connection. This is a DJ, a music guy, a public figure, someone who connects with people, and
Yep.
he knew exactly where you were going, and y'all lockstepped through the rest of your song. And that's, if he wasn't a music person, that might not have happened. And so it therefore speaks to a deeper connection that the two of you have that is undeniable, and it's really amazing. Wow.
That's absolutely, yeah.
After the formal introduction to each other, a friend of Isaac's was playing a gig as part of a jazz trio there in Honolulu. Tommy agreed to check out the show with Isaac that same night. The fellas went home, chilled a bit, and changed clothes for the night, then met back up to roll out to the show together. Along the way, they had a little fun when they got lost trying to find the event, but they made it to the show.
My friend Alika, who is the bass player, he was playing guitar. He's like, hey man, if you want to jump on and sit in on a song or something with us, you can. I was like, sure, that'd be great. So like I hop in, I'm sitting in and playing, and I'm like, this is trippy, man. I'm playing a live gig at a bar, and my birth father is here to see me play. You know what I mean?
Yeah, man. That's unreal.
But then it was so unreal, and then like it was really strange. And I don't know if I've ever told him this part of it, and it connects to what happens the next day, so I totally understand. But something really interesting happened. He got up when I was playing, and he went outside, and he was on the phone. Right? And I was like, oh man, it's like the first time he's ever seen me play, and he just like leaves, you know? And I felt it. It was weird. It was like this strange, like, hurt of feeling like this is such an incredibly special thing, but it's also maybe not as special to him or some, it's like, and like, this is just brain, like, running with it.
Yeah, right.
So just to be totally honest, I like kind of had a rough time after that. Like that night, I probably ended up drinking more than I was intending to at the time, and it became a very different kind of experience. It was like so casual that it almost felt not meaningless, but you know what I mean? It just had a different quality to it. And then, like, I'd love to explain like what happens the next day, because it totally shifted my entire perspective on what happened.
Yeah, sure.
It was basically, Christine calls me the next morning, and I'm just like not feeling super great. And she's like, hey, can you come back to the office? We want to shoot a video of you playing that song and recording that song. It's like, yeah, sure, I can do that, So I come back to the office, and they have this camera set up, and I'm like, all right, cool. So singing, playing the song, it was great. And I was like, thanks. She's like, well, you should sit down because we have something that we need to talk to you about. And I was like, okay. So she's like, well, what would you, it's something like, what would you like me to say? Or what would make this trip even more meaningful, or something like that, And I just like felt it. I could feel it and like I see it click in my mind when I watch the video back. It's like I knew that they had found my birth mom. And she was just like, your birth mom is here. She's in the building. We didn't want to tell you. I called Tommy last night, which was the phone call.
Holy shit.
It was a phone call. It's like, I called Tommy last night to tell him that she's here, and we discussed that we would surprise you.
Oh,
and I was like,
gosh.
oh, of course, I'm such an asshole. Like, of course I gotta, like, assume the worst and look at it some horrible way when they're just, like, trying to coordinate some, this really crazy thing.
Yeah.
But dude, here's the craziest part. All right. And I tried to still tell this story because like I still, like, it still blows my mind. Okay, so what happened was, on the day that I met Tommy, Hawaii International Child had asked King 5 News they told a news station that we were going to be reuniting. So they brought this guy, Chris Tanaka, and the news crew over to like film us reuniting, right? As like a short news story that they wanted to air that afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
And so they interviewed us a little bit, they shot the thing, and they were super nice and really cool. And, you know, Tommy and I are both used to being in like public places, so we were okay being filmed doing such a like kind of like emotional thing.
Mm-hmm. And
to like a bar later that night, and we saw it on the news, right? They played it on the news that afternoon. And on Kauai, my birth grandmother was watching the news, and it says, you know, adopted son reunites with birth father or something. And she's like, oh, that sounds interesting. And then I think either she saw me or she heard my name, and she knew my name was Isaac, and she recognized Tommy. So my birth grandmother gets on the phone and she calls my birth mom and is like, Jay, I think your son's on TV.
Holy mackerel.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Christine, the lady at HIC, has actually managed to find Chandra, my birth mom, via like Facebook or some backwards thing where she ended up getting her work phone number. So she's on the phone with her right at that exact same moment, being like, your son Isaac is on Oahu. He's here. He's open to meeting you if you want to meet him. And so my half sister Shayna and my, birth grandmother all get on a plane and they fly to Oahu the next day.
Shut up. So you're telling me the news crew shows up, films you meeting your birth father, and your maternal biological grandmother sees it and calls her daughter at the same time that Christine is on the phone with her. Get out of here. Are you serious?
Yeah, dude. Isn't that nuts?
Yo, that is unbelievable.
They're like, I think she called, and like, I'm sure somebody in my family is going to be like, oh, you told it wrong. You know, like, there's some elements of the story that are still crazy, because it's like, she calls and she's like, I think Isaac's on TV. It's like, why would he be on TV? Is he, like, what's he doing on the television? What are you talking about?
That is bananas, man. So where did they fly in from?
They flew over from Kauai over to Oahu.
Okay, got you.
It's like a 45-minute flight.
Wow. That's unbelievable, man. So you're sitting there, they've told you, they've asked you to sit down. I assume from the way you described your night, you had a bit of a hangover. So I don't know if I've told anybody that part either, man. That's so bad. Shit. So you end up sitting there and they've told you your birth mother's in the building and it hits you. You can see it on film. What happens next for you guys?
Yeah. Oh man. Like, so Christine goes to get her, she comes in, and like, that one was different, you know, it was really different. Like, hugged each other and just instantly, so much crying, and so much just unexpressed feelings for like 29 years of unexpressed feelings that all just started coming to the surface and really just hemorrhaging, you know?
Yeah.
Like, to the point where we couldn't say anything. So luckily, I had also written a song about mothers. And so I was like able to say like, okay, well, this is great because I have a song that I can play for you. And so, so I was able to just go into it, and after the song was over, it made everything just breathe a little bit. You know, it's like music can help massage in a moment to where it can relax things and it kind of eases the tensions. So I think it helped for me to express something to her. It helped for her to receive something from me. And that kind of mutual give and take helps to bring people closer together, you know?
Yeah.
Cause it's not like I'm coming in and just being like, tell me what you did, or, you know, tell me something, answer my questions. In some cases, like what I've heard, you know, a lot of people feel like, and I understand, it's like, it's your right to feel that way if that's how you're feeling. But I think I needed to do something where I wanted her to know that I wasn't resentful. Like, I wasn't angry. I was confused, and maybe some resentments and anger might surface later, but at that exact time, I didn't feel that way.
That's amazing. I mean,
yeah,
it's a great gift, and you're right. Music does get us through some really emotional times in our lives. And for you, in the moment, to have music that you have written for these moments, for both parents.
Right.
I mean, yo, that is unbelievable. That's incredible. Because in essence, those songs are really for them, and they will never, ever, ever forget that moment. And that's really incredible. Wow.
Immediately after the reunion, Isaac's natural birth mother, Chandra, his birth father, Tommy, and he sat down together. For the first time in 29 years since relinquishing Isaac, his birth parents were face to face. Christine sat down with the family to guide their conversation, helping them talk about the range of issues they might feel they need to discuss.
Which was great, and I thought it was really cool. And then seeing them have interaction and being able to like talk after all this time, and then kind of being there just to facilitate some of these reconnections was also really cool for me. You know, like it felt like it brought a lot of people together, even though it was just, you know, for me. It felt like the residual connections that were made, you know, like these people reconnected, some other people reconnected to parts of themselves that having seen us, and the way that we reconnect inspired them in certain ways. I talked to a lot of some other people that were there that day, and they're just like, we need to remind ourselves of like the humility that it takes to go through this process. And if you do it with humility and with love and care and patience, how well it can go.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Because sometimes it goes wrong. It can go bad. And for a lot of people, that's unfortunately the experience they have. And like, I don't think I even knew that much about reunification. So I wasn't thinking too much about how negatively it could go. I didn't really think about like, hey, maybe it's a super terrible idea to have a news crew film you when you meet your birth parents.
Yeah, right. Right.
Like, what if this is horribly awful? You know? I didn't think about it too much. And I think also I went in with the intention of having an openness to whatever was going to happen. You know, I didn't have a lot of expectations. And I think a part of that too was how fast it happened. You know, I didn't have 2 years to build up a bunch of thoughts and expectations and worry. It was like, I asked the question, and then 3 months, 4 months later, the answer is there.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. There's something to be said for the immediacy of some of these reunifications, because it prevents you in many ways from getting too deep inside your head, as you've alluded to. And, and it also takes advantage of that immediate moment of everyone's receptivity, right? If you go out too far in the timeline and you don't reunite, as we've said, people get inside their own heads, and you have maybe one too many conversations where something sensitive comes out. Someone says something that wasn't intended the way it was received, whatever the thing is. And it in some way can tarnish what was potentially beautiful at the outset. It may be that was going to come out anyway, but if it comes out before that initial sort of, the only thing I can think of is like the bow being pulled off of the gift, right? If you know that something ugly is inside. Yeah.
then
Right, yes.
then it's damaging. And so I can appreciate what you're saying, that you didn't have a chance to step back, over examine or anything. You just dove in and just went for it, and that's how well it went.
Chandra was 22 when she and Tommy conceived Isaac. They weren't in a stable relationship at the time. They both had some things they were dealing with in their respective families, so at the time, adoption just seems like the best choice for Isaac given their circumstances.
It was also really interesting because she was given some options of families to choose. And then considering the family that she did end up choosing, and that my adopted family wanted to adopt a boy or a child from Hawaii, like they wanted to adopt a local baby.
Mm-hmm.
I think it just cemented some of the decision. And at least that's how it's kind of been conveyed to me, that it felt good to know that I was going to a local family. You know, I wasn't like immediately getting like shipped really far away to some other foreign place or anything like that. And I do recall that there's been some conversations around whether or not my birth father would have decided to have kept me if it was up to him.
Mm-hmm.
But my birth mother decided against it, and I think we've all sort of come to understand that it was the right decision to make, despite it being very difficult for everyone involved. And that's a big part of what ended up happening, you know, after that initial meeting, kind of like what you were saying about, you know, it can be really damaging, like when the truth starts to come out, or when all those painful feelings and those resentments and the issues in their own relationships start coming out. It can be really hurtful, but luckily we had that initial sort of joyous occasion of getting together and really seeing the good side of everything, so that when we had to face some of those more complicated issues, we knew that we were coming from a loving place and trying to do it honestly.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't about hurting anyone's feelings. It's not about being mean. It's about getting to the root of what was really going on.
Yeah, because that root is the one from which you have grown up, and it's important for you to know that stuff. And it's good that you had a solid foundation upon which to explore all of that. So yeah, that's really fascinating.
Well, and I credit my adopted parents for also being so supportive.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they were so supportive of this entire process that I never felt like, okay, now that I've like unlocked this door with my birth family, I've turned my back on my adopted family and now I have to make a choice. You know, It wasn't like that. I think it felt like, okay, we're all in this together, you know, and my adopted parents were really present. So when I was having difficulties or not feeling, safe, they reminded me like, well, you know, we're here. And so do what you got to do, you know, make sure that you do what you got to do, but we're not abandoning you and you're not abandoning us. And we know that. And that was really cool because it made for such a stable place to work through hard feelings. Like, and there was some hard feelings. Like I definitely had some arguments with my birth parents. We've had some very difficult conversations around trying to sort out how to be real, not just like, oh, it's all good. This is super cool. You know, like, no, like I feel like there were some things that were really difficult for me to process. And now that we're reconnecting, I want to be able to talk about them. And kind of like what I was talking about earlier about the emotional support and that ability to be emotionally present.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that I feel it's kind of, happening a lot. You know, like Tommy and Chandra both, I think, have a very emotional component to them. So lots of crying, lots of hugging time. You know, my mom tells this story that like whenever she sees something, if she ever watches like a birthing scene on a movie or TV show, it used to make her cry because she would think about me.
Yeah.
You know?
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, oh, that's hard, man.
I know. Can you imagine
You
how
know?
many movies have that joyous occasion as it's
Yeah,
portrayed in the
dude.
movies? I mean, she would be bawling all the time.
But then, yeah, that thing too of like being able to share certain things. Like when I was working at a recording studio, and Tommy actually came up to Washington with his wife, Carolyn, to visit up there. And he came to the recording studio and he was like looking at the soundboard and like checking out the gear. I was like, this is trippy, man.
Yeah.
Like, no one from my family has ever come to like the recording studio with me. I probably should think about whether or not I ever actually invited them, but I think, you know what I mean? Like, this could be my fault. But just that other thing of like, oh, you're actually here, you actually know what's going on, and we can actually talk about like the ins and outs of something that I've spent my lifetime trying to understand, and so have you. That's crazy.
In his adoptive family, Isaac has an older brother and sister. In his maternal family, he has one sister. On his paternal side, he has another older brother and sister who have families of their own. Isaac tells the story of his relationship with his siblings and a mind-blowing connection between his families.
It was crazy. I'm probably going to tell the story slightly wrong, but Maya tells me that, because I was wondering when they knew about me, or if they knew about me, you know? She tells me that they knew about me because there was some adoption paperwork that ended up, I think, in one of Tommy's Bibles or something. And they took it to church and the paperwork fell out. And she was like, what's this? It's like, oh, that's your brother.
Wow.
Yeah. And I mean, I hope, Maya, if you ever hear this, I'm so sorry if I'm telling that story slightly wrong, because I think you only told it to me one time around the time when we first met. But I just remember it being one of those things where they've known about me for a very long time. They've always known about me. And I didn't know I had no idea, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm so glad to know them now. And then, Shayna on my birth mom side, it's really crazy because we live together. So like, that's the other thing. I live on Kauai now and I live with my birth mom and my sister Shayna.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah.
How did that come about? What the?
Yeah. So, I went back to Washington and I was kind of going about my business, but I just felt drawn, you know, something that came up was that Tommy is native Hawaiian, mixed with some other things, but he's about 60%. And so that means I'm native Hawaiian. And I think I might have sort of knew that, but I didn't know what it really meant. And then coming to Hawaii and realizing that there's like an indigenous culture of people here that actually belong to this land, and I'm a part of that lineage, is something that just kind of I've only been really trying to understand in the last couple of years. I think was a big driving force for me to decide that I wanted to move to Hawaii, but it's Hawaii. If you've ever been here, you know, it's expensive.
Right.
And I wasn't really sure how I was going to do it. So then when an opportunity opened up, my birth mom said that there was a room for me if I wanted it, and Tommy's been open to having me come stay. And I had a ton of family from my adopted family side on Oahu and Kauai as well. So I was like, you know what? I'll just do it. Just move and get to know my birth mom, get to know my siblings, get to know my birth father, and you know, that's the thing. I didn't mention about my relationship with my brother and my sister on my adopted family, Aaron and Leanne, and like strengthen my relationships with my adopted family. Like by getting to know Hawaii and getting to know what it was like for all of them to live here and grow up here, it's like strengthened my relationship with them so much. You know, now I like when they used to talk about going to Waimea Canyon or going out to Kapa'a, and like, I didn't know what they were talking about, and now I actually do. So it's just
that's
really,
fascinating.
I kind of bring it all back to, you know, the land and a place like Hawaii and how it really because it's an island, it's like community is everything. Dude, I gotta tell you this one crazy story.
Sure, go ahead.
So, my birth parents and my adopted parents all came together to meet. We all got together to meet on Oahu. I think it was 2018. And so all four of them are there. They come in and just start talking and sharing stories, about living on Oahu and who knows who. And then I don't even know how it comes up, but Tommy starts talking about his biological family because he was also what we call Hanai. He was adopted, but by a family that was connected to his biological family. So he was Hanai'd into this other family, but his biological family lived on Oahu in a place called Red Hill.
Mm.
And he's talking about his siblings, and he says, the Colburns, it's the last name. And then my adopted dad, Philip, he goes, oh, like Marcus?
Sure.
And then he's like, yeah? He's like, no way, Marcus Colburn. That's your family. And he's like, yeah. Like, on Red Hill, my adopted dad, Phil, his family, they live next door to Tommy's biological family.
Oh my
grew
God. Are you serious?
They grew up together. My aunts, my dad's sisters, they hung out with Tommy's biological brother and sisters. Like, there's a photo of them all playing on a little handcart that my dad built.
Shut up. That is crazy.
It's like you grew up next door to the grandfather of the son that you're going to adopt.
Oh my gosh. That is unreal.
Yeah. Yeah. Nuts, right?
Yo, that is really trippy. Wow.
Yeah. So that kind of stuff, man, it happens in Hawaii. Like, there's connections. Everybody's connected. So it's been really fascinating and like crazy too.
Yeah.
Like, okay.
Wow.
There's an actual photo of that, because otherwise I would have a hard time believing it's real, you know?
Yeah. God, that's unbelievable. Jeez, dude, that's unreal. Wow. Damn, Isaac, this is incredible. I love, I hear the joy in your voice as you describe your story, and it sounds so happy and wonderful. I think it would be a mistake not to acknowledge some of the challenging times. You've had some hard conversations. You've had some with your adopted parents as well as your biological parents. But, I mean, it sounds like, as you've said, you've done it all with, humility, compassion. You sound like a sensitive dude who approached this as fast as it was coming at you, with some measure of sort of taking it all into your heart as it came and not trying to judge it too much ahead of time. So I think that's really fantastic, and I think you're super lucky for how this unfolded. And what amazing coincidences. That's so cool. Wow.
Yeah.
Dang.
Yeah.
Wow. And now you live with your biological mother, and you get to experience that wonderful island. That's just amazing. Damn.
Yeah.
Congrats, man.
Thanks, man.
All right, dude. Thanks so much for the call, man. I appreciate it. It was really good talking to you, Isaac.
Yeah, man. I really appreciate what you're doing, man. I've been looking for more resources that help adopted people, and I really appreciate the work that you're doing.
Yeah, thanks so much. And please feel free to share it with Christine and everybody at Hawaii International Child and anybody else out there.
I'm on it, man.
Yeah, if you're, involved with an adoption agency of some kind and someone who is in support of, adoption reunions, definitely share the show. Take care, Isaac. All the best, buddy.
All right. Aloha.
Later. Hey, it's me. The island of Hawaii is such a central part of Isaac's life and his adoption and reunion journey. He's the product of Hawaiian natives and was born there, was adopted there by Hawaiian people, and made his way back for his reunion and now lives there. I like what he said about the connection to Hawaii, healing old wounds, and of course, it's just incredible to hear that he's moved back and is living with his birth mother and sister. I heard notes of nature versus nurture in Isaac's story when he spoke of his love for music, so of course, I'm going to leave you with a few of Isaac's own musical notes from the song he played for Tommy. I'm Damon Davis, and I hope you'll find something in Isaac's journey that inspires you, validates your feelings about wanting to search, or motivates you to have the strength along your journey to learn, Who am I, really? I think you already know the rest of what I would normally say, so I'll just let the song play. Here's Isaac.
Now, Dad, will you please tell me how to be a better man? Dad, will you forgive me, 'cause I'm doing the best that I can. I know you want me to figure it out on my own, but when you hold me close, I don't feel alone. I know you've made mistakes and caused pain you can't forget, but it's not too late, so I'll ask again.